We'll ask everyone to please be seated at this time. I want to welcome everyone here at the chapel as well as those of you who are viewing online. About to begin the services for Mrs. Rita Daitchman, but I would like to announce that if anyone has a cell phone, for those of you present here at the chapel, if you have a cell phone with you, please place it in the silent mode or turn it off completely. That would be appreciated. The services will be conducted by Rabbi Barry Schechter from Congregation Kol Emeth, and I'll ask everyone to please rise as the family enters the chapel.
Mismole David, Adonai, mi yagur bialecha, mi yishkon behar kodshecha, holeich tahamim, ufoil tzedek, v'dover emet bilvavo. Lo ragah leleshono, lo asal riyeu ra, v'cherpa lo nasal krovo. Nifze pinav nimas, v'et yirei Adonai yechabed. Nishpal ara, v'lo yamir. Kaspo lo natan beneshech, v'shochad anaki lo lakach. Ahoseyele lo yimot liolam. God, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain? Those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others, or wrong them, or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless but honor those who revere God, who give their word, and come what may, do not retract, who do not charge usurious interest or take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. Dear friends, we're here for a sad and difficult occasion to say goodbye, which is one of the most difficult things that we can ever do, but also to honor the memory and, if possible, to celebrate the life of Rita Daitchman, the daughter of Albert William, Bill, and Evelyn, Rivka Leah, Bat Avram, Wolf, Edith, who's gone to her eternal rest at the age of 98, and leaves behind a family and friends who loved her very, very dearly. First, I should mention her husband, her late husband, Louis, But we have the children here, David and his Debbie, Evelyn. Did I say that wrong? I'm sorry. No, Debbie, I got your name. I didn't say you were. I said David and his Debbie. Don't frighten me. Evelyn, and I should also mention the late Jeffrey and the late William, Bill, and his late wife, Nancy. And the grandchildren, Yisroel Meir Levi and his Deborah, Elchanan and his Abigail, Yosef Chaim, Rabbi Yosef Chaim and his Chava Mirel, Malka Simma and her Joel, Nosson and his Tova, and Daniel and his Lauren. And great-grandchildren, I wanted to have the names, but I just have here what I was told. Many, many. But of course, they too are affected by this event, very much. I should also mention her late brother and sister, the late Roddy and her late husband Theodore, and the late Harriet and her husband Stanley and Eugene, who are not with us anymore. And we're going to begin by hearing from the family. So we're going to start. I'm going to call on David to speak to us about his mother. Come on, David.
I think if you have to understand who my mother was, you have to understand her parents, because her father, Albert William Fellner, he went by the name William or Bill Fellner, was an extremely unique person, and he wanted more than anything to have a son, and he had 3 daughters in a row. And he knew after the 3rd daughter was born, he was not going to have another chance. As a matter of fact, it really became apparent when Grandma Evelyn, her heart stopped on the delivery table, and they tried everything, they couldn't revive her. And the doctor had to come over to my grandfather and tell him that not only did he not have a son, he had a daughter, but on top of that his wife, her heart had stopped, they couldn't revive her. And he said, it's not possible. He says, my wife promised me that she would say goodbye before she left, and she hasn't said goodbye. So they thought he was hysterical. So calmly, he repeated how they had done everything they could, massaged her heart, gave her a shot of adrenaline, and nothing worked. And my grandfather, who had been the assistant attorney general for Connecticut, was well known. And he threatened the man. He says, you're going to go back in there and you're going to do whatever you can, because if you don't do it, you'll spend 20 years in court instead of spending 20 years being a doctor in the hospital. And they knew he was upset, and they understood. So they went back, and they gave my grandmother a shot of adrenaline, and she woke up and lived another 31 years. There's more to the story, and I'm not going to go into it, but my grandfather was so appreciative to have his wife and so thrilled to have his daughter after that. And he made the decision that my mother would be a tomboy, whether she wanted to be or not, but she would be a tomboy. And so she could do it all. She could ride a horse, chop a tree down, build a porch with Grandpa, and she was like a son to him, but still the daughter. But he loved his children like you can't believe, and the connection and the closeness was unbelievable. Every morning when he would get up to go to work, he'd walk over to the crib where my mother was, and he'd look into her eyes, and he used her eyes as a mirror, and he would tie his tie. He didn't think she remembered it, But later on in life, when she was 21 years old and he needed to tie a tie, so she walked over to him just so he could look into her eyes because he was going to tie his tie. So she did, even though she was only 1 and 2 years old when this happened. My mother is an amazingly intelligent person, was an amazingly intelligent person. She could practically read your mind, and it was spooky. We had a birthday party, and at the birthday party there was a giant piece of chocolate cake left over. And the next day in the house, since it was a double birthday party for both my brother and I, we were born 1 day apart, 3 years in 1 day. So I wanted to cut the piece, and she sensed that I wanted to cut the cake and not make it exactly even. I wanted the bigger piece because I was 3 years older. And she said, you know, the rule is whoever cuts the cake, the other person gets the first pick. So I knew I couldn't cheat. I couldn't cut one piece bigger than the other. But I was astounded that without having said anything, she knew what I was thinking. One of the reasons she knew so well what I was thinking is because when Grandpa died, I was less than 2 years old. And it went from 2.5 till age 5, my mother made it a regular thing for 2.5 years to tell me Grandpa's stories. She adored him. She loved him. He was the most important man in her life. And from Grandpa, she learned great wisdom. She understood people like nobody's business. And she was very productive. She was at a higher level than most people. And I thought at one point that she was the smartest person in the world. I really, to this day, I still think she's an exceptional person. It came out in talking with Rabbi Schechter. I had never noticed it before, but he asked me, did my mother do any work as a wife? And yes, she had several jobs, and I had never noticed it before, but every job that she took, she became the manager of the whole business. Not after being there for years, but they saw her, they saw who she was, and she was appointed a member of a chemical plant. What did she know about chemistry? I don't know, but she was running it. She was working at a place that produced modems. Again, she was put in charge of the whole place. When she went to the Ort office to help with the charitable efforts, she had two good friends, Ruth and Edith. But she had some talent that she could fix every piece of equipment and do everything there was in the office. They asked her to be president, and she said, I can't do it. They said, why not? She says, because my good friends, Ruth and Edith, have been here longer. So they wanted her to be president so much that they had Ruth be president for a year, then Edith for a year, and then they asked my mother, she says, now it's your turn. But she was that person. She was just a very talented person, but most of all, she was a loving person. Her house was open. Anybody in the family who needed a place was welcome there. When my cousin Susan was having a difficult time in California, she came to us for a year. Spent her last year of high school in Skokie. We had a cousin who went through a divorce, and I was out of work, and everything went wrong. He spent 8-10 months with us, and there was an amazing impact that my mother had on people. She's such a kind, generous, but gentle person. She would calm people down, and they could get their bearings and start focusing on being a good, on doing things normal and right. It's like whatever was bothering them got replaced by living your life again and getting back on track and doing things. And I had her as a mother, and I never forget the things that she did for people. But when I went to South Bend, Indiana for a few years, I had a problem that for 2 years, no matter who I asked advice, I couldn't resolve a problem. And when I would intentionally come to Skokie for my dental cleanings twice a year, just so I had an excuse to see her because she lives in Skokie. And so I told her the problem that I'd been dealing with for 2 years, and she said the advice that almost was mirroring everything that everyone else had said. But when she said it, it meant more. It was totally believable. It was totally the truth. I could accept it 100% because it was from her. It meant everything to me when she said it. I don't know how to explain it, what it means, but I don't want to speak too long because I'm just a little bit torn up about things, and I don't think I'm going to be able to maintain my focus here. But she was a very positive person, and she showed you things about the way life works and the way people work. And you didn't realize how much you were learning until afterwards when you used it. And so, for example, she was explaining to me how people think, how they talk, and it wound up that I having heard what she said, when I was in college, somebody asked me, what do we study for the next coming test? I says, it's easy. Look what the guy talked about during all the lectures, and I explained the rules that my mother had told me about when people talk, how you listen to them. And one of the professors, assistant professors, overheard and thought I had stolen a copy of the test or something. It was so accurate to what they wanted to test us on. I was just saying what my mother advised me. One of my sons became a math teacher temporarily at Meor HaTorah. And after a couple of days of being a teacher there, he asked me, he says, Dad, you were teaching over at Telz Yeshiva for a while. And he was running into some issues with the class and how to present information. And basically, I gave him the same advice that my mother had given. And he applied it. And he told me afterwards, there were kids who weren't motivated in the class. They didn't want to do whatever. And he proposed to them, he says, if the whole class gets 80% on a test, he would sponsor a pizza party. Kids who didn't want to learn decided they didn't want to be the bad guy, because if the one kid didn't get the 80%, the whole class lost the pizza party. Kids who were smart and thought they had nothing to prove figured, all right, I'll help the slower kids. And ultimately, the entire class got together and helped each other, and they got their 80%, and they were thrilled. And you heard kids walking down the hall saying he was the best teacher they'd ever had. And he doesn't know it, but it came from my mother, not from me. So there's something I'm forgetting that I wanted to remember. I have to think for a moment here. She mentioned in passing once that my great-grandfather, Henry, lived on the outskirts of town. And he did it because he wanted to be able to grow his own food and be kosher. And basically in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, they didn't have packaged food. So everything was bought fresh, and if you don't want to have problems with bugs or with crud or whatever, you had your own little plot of, and you grew your own vegetables. So great-grandfather Henry, he had his own place, and as the city would grow out, the zoning would change, and he'd move out another 3 miles. And every time he moved out, he would organize the Jews who were living on the outskirts of town and form a minyan, and ultimately get a shul started. And ultimately 4 shuls got started because of my great-grandfather. And when my mother told me this, I was 5 or 6 years old, and I was so impressed because I know how many people live paycheck to paycheck and how hard it is for people to get by, and how hard it is to get people together as a group and to build a community. And here he was doing it 4 different times. And I walked away with a wish in my heart that I would have the schus to help rebuild and build shuls like he did on. I'm forgetting something, and I can't remember what it is, but it's something important. the important thing was I loved my mother. She loved me. You knew no matter what, she was always on your side. And she basically never said no to me for anything. And I'm not saying that I was a spoiled brat or anything, but on the other hand, whatever I needed to do, she wanted me to have that opportunity. And I got more love from her than any of my siblings because I was the oldest. But then Evelyn came along, and she's the girl, so she, as a girl, got even more. So, just as a little aside, my middle name is Evan, and my mother expected and wanted to have a girl for her first child. I don't know why she was convinced that she was going to have a girl. Clearly, she was wrong. But she suddenly had a boy and had to think of a name. And it turns out she'd been reading about King David and liked King David and his history and his story. So she gave me the name David. But when it was time for the bris, she wanted to remember the grandparents. So I was given the Hebrew names Yehuda and Yaakov. So this caused great confusion. Even Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, the Rosh Shiva, didn't know until my wedding day that I had David as an English name and Yehuda Yaakov is for Hebrew. So it was, but how do I say this? My mother was not a rabbi. She didn't go to yeshiva, but I said it when I sent out a notice that I learned more from her, and I had more. She meant more to me than all my friends, all my teachers, all the rabbis, everybody in the world. There's nobody who can replace who she is and what she was to me. There's something I wanted to say about her as a person, her integrity. She went to work one time for Ask Mr. Foster, which was the largest travel agency in the city. They had 5 offices, and the big one was in Evanston. And she was meticulous. When people would do a layaway plans, like they'd have a $2,000 travel thing, and they put in like $20 a week for a year or $50 a week, she made sure every last penny got put into a special account that was there for these reserve things. The owners of the business, the father and son, I don't know, they got into some gambling debts or something. The entire business went under. And she was the only one that her clients didn't lose a penny. But she was very straight, very organized, and very right about things. And she was always, for me, that person that you could understand and trust and rely on for everything in life. There's nobody like her. There's never going to be anybody like her for me. She's a one-of-a-kind person, and I know no matter what I didn't do enough for her. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for those wonderful, eloquent words. And now we're going to hear from Evelyn.
I'm not good at this, but I want to speak about my mom because she was so great. I just want to add to the story about Mom and Grandpa that he taught her to shoot guns, and she could shoot a snake from 20 feet. And he taught her to fix plumbing, and I remember when we were growing up that my dad would be leaning against the sink with tools on the counter, with tools on the counter, and she'd be under the sink, and he'd be waiting for her to tell her what she needed. So yeah, she could do it's true. She was pretty amazing, but that way. And then the other thing, there's this funny story about Grandpa, and she was having a piece of cake with Grandpa, and she loved the icing, so she went to eat all the cake, and just the icing was left. And I remember her telling me that one time Grandpa said to her, "Oh, look." And he grabbed the icing from her. But they were super close. They were very close. But yeah, so we were the fortunate ones, having her, and you might say we won the lottery. She wasn't just saying "I love you." She was an act of "I love you," and showed it in countless ways. And I was very curious growing up. I wanted to try everything. I wanted to take every kinds of dance, including African dance in junior high, and whatever I wanted to check out. And we didn't have a lot, but she made sure that I got to experience whatever I wanted to experience, no matter what. She didn't care what my dad said, I was gonna have, like, my curiosity satisfied. And because of her, I went to this incredible alternative school, and I really evolved, and sort of started becoming the person that I've become from that school. Anyway, I'm not going from my script, but and the other thing was, when we were growing up and I was little, I was not that hungry. I would have maybe a chicken wing, and then I was done with dinner. And for some reason, I started going around the table massaging everybody in the family. And I just could feel what it felt like when I touched people. And we had this brother, Bill, and Bill was very funny. He could make me laugh without speaking words. To the point of, tears in my eyes, crying and stuff. But Bill was always very funny. And so we would have these competitions, who could make mom feel better with the massage. And he would sort of choreograph this, like he was really working really hard and giving her this massage, but he really wasn't doing anything. But it was just for the fun. Anyway, it was all in fun and everything. But I knew I was the best massage therapist in the family. And excuse me, I'm just, But anyway, so yeah, the massage thing became our love language, and it was throughout our lives. And towards the end, the last couple years, someone told me, it was really an astrologer, but someone told me, I don't know why, but she said, your mom will really appreciate massages, which I always did anyway. But she specifically said her feet and legs. And David and I would do this for her. But I always felt like when I was with her in these last couple of years, when I was doing this massage, like this palpable love cycling through both of us. Like, it was in both of us. It was just a beautiful thing. I think she was both the smartest person in the room and the kindest person in the room. And that was my mom. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. And now we're going to hear from a grandchild, Yosef Chaim, Rabbi Yosef Chaim.
I'm speaking on behalf of my siblings, kind of sent around to get aligned, see where everyone else's memories were. And there's no question that unanimously between my siblings, our memory of my grandmother, the main thing that kind of stands out is the happiness, her smile, her laugh. I would say her unique and distinctive laugh. I can hear it. You could hear my grandmother's laugh from a distance, and just know it was her. And it was always there. There was never I don't remember ever having a situation with my grandmother where she wasn't happy, smiling, and laughing. I think Yisrael pointed out to me, right? Like it's pretty wild, unexpected. She lived a life of hardships. I was kind of expecting maybe my father or my aunt to talk about those, but it didn't come up. But she didn't have an easy life. She was a widow at a fairly young age, and buried a child at a very young age, among other things. I'm sure there's more that I don't even know, but she still maintained this just very happy, positive demeanor. She also had this way of giving a compliment that by the time she was done giving you the compliment, you felt, was that me? Like, was she, like, it felt so like, it just made you sound so amazing, way better than you really thought. Like, my own personal example of this was, so one time she asked me, it's funny because both my father and my aunt spoke about, she was pretty handy herself, but I guess maybe she was, I feel like she was old enough that maybe she wasn't physically capable anymore. She asked me to assemble a bookcase. Probably was an IKEA bookcase. If it wasn't, it was not a particularly complex process. I was a teenager, and forever after, she would like gush about the fact that I built this bookcase for her, and maybe it's 2 bookcases. She would, and every time she was like, you remind me of my father. He was so handy also. Okay, I guess that's I didn't feel maybe she saw something. I ended up I'm a pretty handy guy now, but so she saw something in me, but I definitely never felt that I deserved her compliment. But it was always there, and it was always part of that positivity of just seeing such great things in people. And so again, Yisrael shared with me a story. I don't remember this. He says I was a baby, so I'll have to take him at his word. He said that my grandparents were babysitting, I guess it would be the 3 older brothers. I assume Malkasim wasn't born yet. And it sounded like, my parents were away, grandparents got to babysit, and some argument between my grandmother and grandfather started brewing or developing, some disagreement, conversation. He said he remembers, as a little kid, I guess a memory that sticks with him forever, is that my grandmother just started singing to my grandfather and completely, just brought down the temperature. They began singing back and forth to each other, completing each other's lines. And just this just beautiful, happiness. And an ohev shalom v'rodev shalom. Someone who loves peace and chases peace. But I think that one of the kind of misconceptions that I had of my grandmother is that because she was always so happy and bubbly, I never really saw just how really smart she was. She just always kind of the only theme I ever saw was just happiness, but there was always those little clues, just how smart she really was, if you paid attention to them. If you came to her house, it did not matter how early you came in the morning, right? And I remember coming pretty early. The New York Times crossword puzzle was done. She would eat through them as if they were nothing. Right. She's a formidable opponent in Scrabble and cribbage. I know all of my siblings remember her coming, and we always played games at Grandma, and she was quite the opponent. Paradoxically, I think many people, as they get older, right, their kind of their intelligence wanes as their physical faculties fall, decline. Last summer, I visited here in Chicago to pick up my son from camp, and I stopped by my grandmother. I think that because as she was getting physically older, she maybe hit it a little less. And I saw that kind of sharp, witty side to her that I'd never seen before. It's coming through. Just someone who was really with it. Even as a 97-year-old woman, you could tell she She knew what was going on. She knew, she understood. Just have one last story here, because it's kind of connected to the Scrabble and New York Times that my wife reminded me of. Because unfortunately, my wife and kids did not have so much time. I live out in Portland, and the last several years, it was hard to travel. So there aren't too many stories directly with my wife and kids, but my wife remembers one time sitting down to play cards with Gigi, as she wanted to be known. And she asked, it was like a game of hearts or spades or one of those, and she said, well, what suit was led? And he said, clubs. So I guess I have to follow suit. And it was just this funny moment where like everybody looked around at each other and realized like none of us had ever appreciated where that phrase came from. Right? It never clicked. And just almost accidentally just kind of taught us something. Now I know. She was a very special woman.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Yosef Chaim. Thank you, all of you, for those lovely words. You've given a complete picture. I'm sure it's not a complete picture, actually. Impossible to give a complete picture. But I've spoken to you beforehand and thought I'd heard just about everything, but you've added some wonderful things. I'm just thinking the things that all of you have mentioned, these qualities. First of all, you talked about the smile. We all know what a smile can do. If you're feeling down and someone just smiles at you the right way, it can untie knots in 1 second. And Shammai, one of our great scholars, who we're told was fairly ill-tempered in some occasions, and yet he was the one who said to receive everyone, b'sever panim yafot, receive everyone with a cheerful face, which is something we can try to do. And it may be easy, it may be difficult, depending on the occasion. But, and I hadn't realized till you spoke about it, how difficult a life she'd actually had, to be widowed, to lose a child. Something terrible. I'm sure there are people who've gone through that who have been bitter through life afterwards, and they cannot be blamed for that. But on the other hand, our refusal to blame people who are like that should not result in a refusal to praise people who are like that. Because it is quite remarkable that you had someone who, with this seva panim yafot, with this face, and with this love, and with this warmth, and with this instinct, and we know this, there are some people, when you are in their presence, you feel better. I think you talked about hearing Eitz's advice from a whole bunch of people, and then hearing what logically is the same thing from your mother. And somehow, it affected you differently. In fact, it affected you. The others hadn't. The others hadn't helped at all. And this is a rare thing in a human being, and especially rare in someone who has had such a difficult life at the beginning. And this is praiseworthy beyond words, really. It is something wonderful and something beautiful, and something that we need more of in our very difficult world at the moment. So we have that aspect of her, the heart, the soul, the neshama, whatever you want to call it. But also, as you said, the mind, that wonderful instrument. I'll forego mentioning of the fact that she was so handy something which we don't, not only don't we associate with Jewish women, at least of a certain age, we don't even associate it with Jewish men. I refer you to Jackie Mason. Anyway, but quite apart from that, which is extraordinary and unusual, but the mind, this wonderful mind, as you said, well, you both told me, you just now, and you told me about Scrabble, about a mind that can see round things and solve problems, and yet know how to communicate that. You know, I've had some brilliant teachers, and most of us couldn't understand what they were talking about. As teachers, they were useless. They were brilliant, but they were useless. And I've had others who stylistically, in terms of communication, were wonderful, but the brains were not there to such an extent. But she had both. She had both of these things. And finally, something that you mentioned when we spoke to each other, her absolute, utter honesty and decency, which is mentioned in Tehillim Tet Vav, in the 15th Psalm, which I read before. Holech tamim ufoel tzedek v'dover emet bilvavo, who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts. So this straightness, this honesty. Now this is all in one human being, and there are other qualities as well, I know. And you've only given some examples. But there can be no higher praise than you have all given to her. She was a bracha, she was a blessing in your lives. You were unbelievably fortunate to have her. And I hope and pray that all the examples, there's no way that each of us can say we want to be like her or live up to her. You can't. But we can take little bits of someone's life, certain bits of them, and at certain moments, it doesn't happen all the time, they can actually help us. Today is a day of mourning, of grief, of sadness, hearts ripped apart. But in the future, in the time to come, there will be moments, maybe even now, but more and more, I think, as time goes on, when you might be intimidated by someone or something or some circumstance and feel, I can't do it. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not something enough. At that moment, you may hear her voice. You may also see her smile. And that may well help to lift you up out of that mini slough of despair. And there may be other times, this has to do with the honesty and the decency and the holech tamim, uprightness, when you might be tempted, we all are, to cut a corner, to do something that's not quite right, and you'll think of her, and you won't do it. And in that sense, as well as many other senses, she lives on. This is the Yerusha, this is the inheritance, this is what she's left you, much more important than real estate or money or any of those things. This is it. And so of her I say, Tehei nishmata tzurura b'tzur ha'chayim, may her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. And to her I say, Rita, Rivka Leah, bat Avram Wolf Idis. Lechi b'shalom, go in Frieden, go in peace. Hab alechtig in Gan Eden, may your repose be in paradise. You'll never be forgotten. Never. You'll always be remembered in love by those who knew you and loved you, and those whom you knew and you loved. Amen. We have these little booklets here. We have the 23rd Psalm. If you could open them, and on the left side, we're going to read it in English. Would you join with me, please? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Could you, if you can, could you stand, please? If it's difficult for you to stand, please don't. But if you can. Hail Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamramim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tohachat Kanefei Ashina, B'malot Kedoshim Utarim, Ki Zohar Harakia Masirim, Et Nishmat Rivka Leah Bat Avram Wolf Vidit Shalachal Yolama Pavor Shanach Nodrihim Nitzdaka Beyad Azkarat Nishmata Began Eden Tehei Menuchata Lachein Bala Rachamim Yastireha Beseit Kanafav Leolamim Yitzeror Bitzorachim Et Nishmata Adonai Unachalata V'tanuach B'shalom al mishkava V'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Rita Daitchman, the daughter of Albert William, Bill, and Evelyn, who has entered eternity and in whose memory we offer charity. May her repose be in paradise. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence. And let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace, and let us say, Amen.
Please be seated for a few brief announcements. The interment will take place at Shalom Memorial Park, located in Arlington Heights. For those of you joining us in procession, we will provide those vehicles with an orange funeral safety sticker, which will be placed inside your front windshield, and also a magnetic flag for the top of your vehicle. And please use your bright headlights and your emergency flashers at all times while in procession, and use your horn liberally going through the intersections. The Shiva will be observed the Daitchman Skokie residence directly from the cemetery until 8 p.m. And then the Shiva will be at both residences, the Daitchman Skokie residence and the Chicago residence. Please refer to your service folder. For those of you watching online, this information is also listed. Yes, sir. Okay. The Shiva during the day will be at the Skokie residence, and then in the evening, the Chicago residence. Minka will be at 420 at the Chicago residence. At this time, I'll ask everyone to please rise and the pallbearers to step forward. Yes, ma'am. Yes, of course. Okay. Yeah.
Please be seated.
I'm sorry, just one thing. I am going to be at my mother's house 3 times this week, and it's on Facebook, if you know me on Facebook. But it's tonight until 8, and I forget the hours on Thursday and then Sunday. It's not all clear because this happened quickly, and we have 2 houses where the where this is happening. It was just a lot to handle. But you can, you can do that, or call me, text me, message me. Please, Ron. Step forward.